Now, one of the things that I do in sort of my day job is to think with companies and organizations about what the future might be like and what it may like for them. And one of the things I always try to explain to people is, if you think about the future, what you expect depends on how you think about progress and change. So intuitively, because of those 800,000 years of slightly more advanced physics access, we tend to think that the future will be slightly like tomorrow, probably a lot less in this audience, but the general audience tends to think that. So gradual progress. So tomorrow is like today and the day after also, and then in the far future, after your pension starts, then things really will change and you'll have to change your business model. If you look at technologically driven change in the history of that, you see that things might start off slowly. So, a few thousand people start doing some weird stuff on interconnected computers. And it stays like that for a long, long time. So the first 25 years of the internet was like that. Nobody knew it existed except a few specialists. Then suddenly, ordinary people can get it, and within a few years, everybody is doing it. So an accelerated progress, which is what most technology actually does, because the green line describes technology adoption and impact of every technology in human history, pretty much, from metalworking and agriculture up to 3G mobile phones. All follow sort of that curve. A few early adopters, and then it goes really quickly. Now, it has a major impact for predicting the future. If this is our current technology, say my little laptop over there, and up there, at the end of technical capabilities, we have those kinds of laptops, but now I can have an interesting conversation with them. Now, is that Star Trek? Is that 200 years away? Because we have to go from here in time all the way to the end of the bar? Or is what's going on that we are actually already here, but it's this intuition thing that is sort of bugging our brain, and it's only maybe 15 years away? Now, whether something is 200 years away, in which case you're not going to spend a lot of time thinking about it, or 15 years away, makes a big difference. So I hope to show that it's 15 years. So, Mr. Future Guy, they then always say to me, where the hell's my flying car? Well, there it is. You can buy it. It's hellishly expensive. It's damn difficult to fly, which is probably the reason why we don't have flying cars. Because, of course, you having a flying car is a great idea. But your neighbor having a flying car, if they have a 15-year-old son who wants to impress the girl next door, is a very bad idea. So we all know the problems with cars that move in 2 dimensions. Think of cars moving in 3 dimensions. Big mistake. But we learned something about transport that is interesting. This used to be our fastest way of transport for quite a long time. And so the world was really big, and people were very much defined by geography. Where you were born defined who you were, how you lived, who you knew, and so forth and so forth. And as technology got better, we were able to move faster and move more people faster. And so the world became smaller, and we started to live in a bigger world. We started to move transcontinental. Now, this went further and further and further up until the late 1960s, where you could cross the Atlantic Ocean in 3.5 hours. So somebody looking at this trend in, of course, 1971, well, look, by the year 2000, it's obvious. We're all going to have nuclear-powered flying cars, and they're going to be, Mach 3, Mach 4, something like that, and it will be great. Except that didn't happen. We got stuck with that. This was also made in the late 1960s, and this is still how we do it. And so over the last 40 years, essentially nothing has happened. They've gotten a bit cheaper and a bit safer maybe, but that's about it. So with transport, with moving atoms around, particularly people, we had a high acceleration for there, and then it sort of leveled off. So what we do as a scenario planners or futurists or whatever label we like to use is, we don't predict the future. If I could predict the future, I'd be working for Goldman Sachs and making 200 million a year. I can't. But what you can do, just by applying common sense and knowing a little bit of history, is try to map out what sort of the range of possibilities is and how you plan for that. So as you move further in time, what's probable to happen, what's possible to happen, and what are the wild cards that you might want to maybe not prepare for, but think about a little bit. So you have like a beginning of a plan to react if something really weird happens. So this is an example of something that was developed in the late 40s. It's sort of a slide rule for spaceships. So the idea was that people would use this to navigate their spaceship. And of course then something else happened, which is of course what this entire conference is about. This happened, which made that slide rule quite useless for navigating spaceships. Now, it's not the first time we've had an information revolution. This is an earlier one. I talked about it earlier in my talk yesterday also. The Gutenberg printing press made it possible to produce a book suddenly at less than a 10,000th of the cost of what it was before. Because before this machine, making a book meant that a monk would sit down for 1 or 2 years and copy the book by hand. Now, somebody who could write in those days was a very highly educated professional because, of course, since there were very few books, it was very hard to learn to read, to learn to write. So books were very, very expensive, something in the order of €250,000. Now, with this, the price dropped through the floor, which meant the amount of books went through the roof. And not just Bibles, of course, not just Bibles in other languages than Latin, which immediately created, lots of interesting discussions among people, but also other books. So a couple of decades after this has been invented, we are out of the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, and that's probably not a coincidence. So this is the map of Europe a little bit later. We've had 250 years of religious war. 30% of the German population is dead because they were, bashing each other over the head about certain interpretations of the Bible. But this is the beginning of the modern Europe, and the Catholic Church is no longer, that big a power. This is the beginning of the nation state, and it's all run on that Gutenberg printing press. And the modern Europe thus came about. So I think that what we're doing now, and many of you are actually doing it, I'm usually just talking about it, but many of you actually make this. This is probably the biggest sort of cultural revolution of the last millennium. And we're in the middle of it, and sometimes we don't even notice it anymore. But we'll have as much change as getting out of the Middle Ages into modern Europe, and we'll have that in maybe 50 years, and some of them have already passed. So now, of course, everybody has a printing press with a global reach, and that is going to have some quite interesting consequences. And particularly national governments haven't really figured that out yet. So a library, you may have heard about them, a library is now a really quiet place where you go with your laptop so you can access Google Books. Because, of course, in the library just has those books they have there, which is, only a few, and of course all the books you need tend to be somewhere else. So this is the first computer I ever saw as a young lad. My dad used to work for KPN Research, and he had one of these thingamajiggies to do statistical analysis. And they cost a couple of $100,000 back in the day when a dollar was actually worth money. Of course, it didn't have a screen, but it could print out on a meter-wide paper. It could make like large images of your favorite comic heroes. So when I was there, it was programmed so you could press one of the buttons, and then it would print out a 3-meter-long image of Lucky Luke in lots of double printed S's. So that was great. Now, last year I got that other thing from my phone company because I was so good to not switch to another phone company. And that is a computer pretending to be a phone, pretending to be a laptop, which can do everything that all of my first 5 or 6 computers can do put together, except it fits in the back of my pocket and it does a few other things like satellite navigation. Now that phone, computer thing, is several thousand times as powerful as the big thing you see over there, and over 1,000 times as cheap. So that is a pretty good price-performance increase. And I think, besides from maybe some chemical industries, there's no other area of technology that has ever had such a good price-performance increase in a person's lifetime. Now, this is the historical perspective of price-performance of computers. And the interesting thing here is not all the individual data points. It's actually quite an old graph already. But the interesting thing is here that no matter what else is happening in the world, this just goes on.